Thanks so much for coming, everyone. I know it's a beautiful day out, so appreciate it. We got a lot of sun coming in, so that's good. We have, as Melanie said, we have a really fantastic panel. We're going to start off by doing a couple of quick intros, and we want to make this conversational, so we'll have a conversation up here for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. So I'm Matt. I'm a senior product manager at Drift, which is a conversational marketing platform. Shameless plug. We have a conference this September, and I have golden tickets over there if you want a promo. All right, that's it. Good.
It's a great conference, too. Highly recommended the conference. I'm Matthew Bellows. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Yesware. Yesware is, broadly speaking, software for salespeople. So if you are a salesperson or work with salespeople and you want to have them be more effective and close more business, I would recommend trying Yesware, which is available at yesware.com.
Started a trend.
Yeah, that's it. I'm Emily Pavlini. I'm a co-founder of Diffeo. Diffeo is an AI-powered research assistant that connects to all the tools you use, understands your context, and identifies knowledge gaps, and then recommends you information that will fill those knowledge gaps.
Awesome. I'm Dr. Skyler Place. I'm the Chief Behavioral Science Officer at Cogito. We are an artificial intelligence coach for conversations. So we help the Fortune 100 employees have better conversations with their customers by guiding them on how to speak differently in conversations while they're happening. And we're at cogitocorp.com.
My name is Katica. I am the founder and CEO of Pipeline. We are a company who's the alumni of the Salesforce Accelerate program, and actually as part of that launched the first gender equity app on the App Exchange, which you can download. It's free. Pipeline is actually a software platform that uses artificial intelligence to increase financial performance of companies through closing the gender equity gap. So the full power of Pipeline is not yet on the App Exchange, but what it does is intercept HR decisions before they're made, provide recommendations, and then track the impact of those recommendations.
Great. It's a pretty good group, right? Yeah. So I want to start off, give us a bit of a foundation here for the conversation, and just kind of pose the question of like, what is AI? And in the context of, I know that we had a chance to connect before this. What does AI look like? How much are we using it today in the workplace? What does that look like?
Well, of course.
All right, go ahead. You're good. We'll break this line.
Since I'm the oldest person on the panel, I think I'll start with the historical perspective, which is basically, that AI was first like a common term in video games, where you would encounter these computer-controlled characters in Quake or Doom or whatever, and the AI was the thing that tried to mimic the behavior of other players in a computer, in a CPU, so that, and you'd say the AI sucks when the little guy that you were trying to shoot wouldn't duck behind the box and take cover. Instead, would just wander around or run into the wall again and again and again. So that's how AI, as a common sort of science term, at least in my experience, started.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, so a lot of our users at Diffeo are actually intelligence analysts and financial analysts as well. And we say that we're augmenting them. We're not in a position to replace them yet. They're very good at analysis and making decisions, and we're not in a position to replace the human aspect of that yet. So we think of ourselves as a teammate, I guess, to augment these analysts, and we're just doing a lot of things that the machine is good at and letting the user do what they're good at. So we're crawling through lots of different documents and reading much more than the analyst could, and bringing them this information, and then they can do what they're good at and do the analysis and actually make the decision. So I guess we, like a teammate, is how we think of AI at Diffeo.
Interesting. So it's much more from your perspective, like how do you augment what exists of a person doing a certain job? I'd love to get Skyler or I'm
Katica.
so sorry, Katica. I was going to say
Katica,
sorry.
with a K.
There we go. Great. So there's this concept of augmented versus, I think some people have this perspective of like, it is a black box. You just throw a bunch of data at it and it gives you answers. Like, what is the difference there and how does that look?
Yeah, so I think it's a question of the problem that you're trying to solve, and there's sort of a difference between sort of generalized artificial intelligence, which is what you see in science fiction, and is sort of the dream that many of us envision of being able to ask the black box anything and get back an answer better than we could have generated ourselves. But I think what sort of the modern approaches are showing and where value is being created today in the workplace is in sort of specialized AI or approaches that have been designed to solve particular problems, whether those are to augment human workers in tasks that they are good at but can be improved, or to provide expertise in areas where humans are deficient or not as capable relative to machine approaches.
We would agree. But I think what's interesting about that, and which is also interesting to what Diffeo does, is so there has been talk, probably more talk, about bias being actually programmed into AI, right? So, and then whether that's in the public sector or in the private sector, and then basically engendering biases over and over again. What has been maybe less talked about is actually how you might use AI to overcome human biases, right? So decision making is one of those places where bias actually inherently comes into play, right? So if you are familiar with Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman, you understand how our brains work and how we take in information. And when you make decisions about people in your organization, and that's fraught with bias, potentially, you can actually have a profound impact both on people's lives as well as our economy. And so that's what we do. We don't replace the manager, so your manager is not going to become pipeline, but rather what we do is augment their decision making around, we say unconscious bias meet conscious action. So now you understand the decision that you're making and actually how that will move you toward gender equity really through the economic lens versus away from it. And when we talk about gender equity, just one other thing that I think is important, particularly when we talk about AI, we talk about it from an economic lens, not just the social issue. So it certainly is a social issue, but also it's a massive economic opportunity. In the US, we could actually add $2 trillion to our GDP if we close the gender equity gap. The same holds true within your companies. So there's actually an economic cost to not augmenting your decisions.
So there's a bunch of pieces there that I think are interesting around biases, decision making, trust, and all that. So from a perspective of you have this decision making AI tool, right? How do you avoid it getting biases? Because I know that we all hear these stories of these like Facebook death bots or things like that, right? Where they get some crazy bias from whatever system they're learning from. What are some of your thoughts on that? Maybe Katica, you can start us off.
Well, I think it depends who's behind the computer, right? So AI, I assume most people here have some knowledge around AI, so they understand it's as much as we would like it to be magic, it's not magic. There's actually people who are programming artificial intelligence, and it's fundamentally, and so it matters who's actually behind it as well, and how you're training those algorithms. And what I think when we also talk about augmented, and this is what the World Economic Forum also talks about, is that while you may replace some rote jobs, like factory jobs, for instance, or those kinds of things, it's always important to actually have it as an augment, not as a replacement for. Right? You still need human interaction with the artificial intelligence, and I think when you talk about AI, it's often sort of brings to the forefront the prisoner's dilemma, right? And how you make decisions and how do you make ethical decisions within a computer.
Yeah, I think one interesting part about bias in AI is there's a general idea in machine learning or in AI that sort of more data is always better. I think what's interesting with bias is that having more data will not necessarily solve your bias problem.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of work with conversational data, and you can imagine if we have 10 million phone calls and in 90% of them there are men interrupting women, and we model that into our approach, for example. That is not necessarily the behavior that we want to recommend people to be doing, right? Even if it is the most prevalent behavior that we see in phone calls in our data sets. So understanding both the limitations of big data, as well as understanding the constructs in your data that you care about, and making sure that what is good and what is prevalent are understood differently.
What's interesting for us is bias is actually a very big concern for our users. When the analysts are learning tradecraft, a big thing is, they shouldn't just be looking for information that they want to find. They should try and, challenge themselves and look at different sources they might not think of. So for us, we're thinking about, reducing and limiting bias a lot. And one of the ways that we do that is actually, we talked about AI being a black box. We try to actually expose as much as we can to our users, which seemed a little counterintuitive for us at first. We thought users would just, want to get a Diffeo recommendation to learn something they didn't know, and they wouldn't necessarily care where it came from or how we got it. But we actually found the opposite, and they were very curious, where we got the information or why we chose to show that to them, why it was ranked so highly. So, we try and do as much as we can. We show the user, we expose to the user all of the queries that Diffeo is automatically formulating and running across these different search engines and different data sources, and we show them all of that information so they can see it and trust the tool and see that it's doing exactly what they would be doing if they were doing the job. And another way we do it is one of the biggest factors in our ranking, how we rank the recommendations, is novelty. So we actually want to show users information that they don't already know, show them information that will surprise them from a source they might not have considered, or just something they didn't know yet. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to eliminate it.
So I think a really interesting thing that this brings up is trust in the data, right? So you show all the data to get the inherent trust. From your perspective, I know that we've talked before, and you say that you're long on AI from perspective of impact and all that. From the perspective of trusting these decisions and all that, talk a little bit about how you think about that, and when you think about building it into your own product, what does that look like?
Yeah, our focus is for B2B companies. So we work with salespeople, largely B2B salespeople, and so the data sets that they have to train AI on are necessarily very fragmented and very specific to that particular company, that particular team at that company, or that division within that company. And so what is tempting to think of from a sort of big picture point of view as a ton of sales data is actually lots and lots and lots and lots of instances of very specific sales data. So because of that fragmentation, both in the CRM and in email and in calendar and in phone call, it's hard. We've tried. Believe me, my investors will tell me will testify that we have spent lots and lots of money hiring very good data scientists and machine learning people to make sense of the big massive data. But really, machine learning has only been valuable to our customers at the customer level, because only then can we, in a big customer, a customer with hundreds or thousands of salespeople using Yesware and Salesforce as the CRM, then it's an homogeneous enough data set to be able to draw some conclusions out of. And the big questions that the end users always want what you say. Why did you come up with that recommendation versus this recommendation? I think you're probably wrong because I'm a salesperson and I'm used to making my own decisions. Why are you recommending that? And you do have to show them why. But then the manager and the director and the VP will say, what are the other things going on in the world that could explain this result? So there are lots of exogenous variables in sales that have nothing to do with the communication between person and prospect. And so all of those things basically make me feel like for a B2B use case, machine learning is not yet developed enough to be broadly deployed across a large user base. But instead can only really be applied to point solutions. And if we do that right, then the customers will start to trust it more and start to rely on it more. But if we try to go big too fast, then I think then we run the risk of basically burning people out on this whole AI thing.
Any responses to that?
I just think that's funny. We totally experience the same thing, and it's almost, I mean, a lot of the analysts we're working with have been doing their job for years and maybe decades, and they have very, they have certain routines, they have certain tradecraft established over all this time, and they're really like putting our tool to the test, and they want to see exactly why Diffeo found this and make sure it's doing the right thing. But so yeah, for establishing trust, I think just showing all of that and exposing that is how we accomplish that, I guess. It's very valuable.
Yeah, so we have the same problem, but we can't afford to take that strategy, which is sort of interesting. So we have a situation where our users are receiving the feedback from our AI within about 100 milliseconds of a behavior that they're doing. So imagine if I interrupt you, I get a notification immediately, and I have to decide if I'm going to act on it or not. So we have to build a human-computer interface and a UI that is inherently trustworthy, because by the time that they've read the advice, we've already pulled their attention away from the conversation that they're having with somebody else. So they have literally tens of milliseconds to make a decision on if I'm going to stop talking right now or if I'm going to keep on talking. So we've taken an approach of really taking both the psychology and the product teams and integrating them to think about what is the persona of a software that's trustworthy, so that our users in those tens of milliseconds make the right decision to take our advice, so that they stop monologuing like I am right now. Right?
It's interesting. So there's like these AI can be used very much in like a split moment. Like here's a way to think about how you're behaving or whatever it might be. I feel like some of the world that you're hoping to create is like a decision framework that like a whole team works around, or is it more of a like here's a suggested answer, go down this path?
It's the second. So what we do is it's their data, our algorithms. So you have typically companies have at least one human capital management system, typically 2 or more. So they'll have their core HR and then an applicant tracking system. Those tend not to be the same, and then they may have a myriad of them. And you have a specific decision that you need to make. So you post a job requisition, or you submit a pay proposal. It could be a merit increase, or you're hiring someone new, or you're promoting someone. You're writing a performance review. You're doing bigger companies do 9-boxing, so they figure out who they're actually going to develop from a future leader perspective, or you're actually promoting someone. So you actually have a specific decision that you're going to make, and so we provide information for you to make that decision in a way that both moves your company toward gender equity and also expands the economic footprint. So you can do good and you can do well.
Are the problems that you're facing, do they span companies and industries? I.e., do you see the same kind of gender bias across industries and companies? Yeah.
Yes.
So then you can generalize across this big customer base.
Yes,
That's
and what
interesting.
we find is that people, so interestingly enough, what is for us, what is the most important person to shake their head yes is the people analytics person in the company, right? Because we expose their pay gap. We expose the company's pay gap, and we also expose it across, not just at an aggregate level, but for every single individual, what that reconciliation would need to be. And so having the people analytics person say, yes, that's correct, is actually critically important for us, much like your analysts are avoiding confirmation bias, right? And so you're looking to basically get people to the point at which they actually trust the recommendations that we're making.
Great. So there's this context of helping a business make a decision. And then there's also this context that Emily and Skyler, your products are focused on around helping the individual change their like very active day-to-day behaviors. Can you talk a little bit about like how that looks today, but maybe how it's going to look tomorrow, and how the knowledge worker needs to adapt to this sort of world? Who wants to start?
I mean, I can go a little bit. If you want, just about, because Yesware sort of does both. We have both manager reporting and analysis and end user salesperson. And the way we affect the end user salesperson's life is by basically recommending the next best action for them to take. And that's based on the sales process that they're using, the data that's in Salesforce and the activities of the prospects out there in the real world. And so we just have a set of cards that basically reorders in real time that says, do this next, do this next, do this next. And right now, frankly, it's fairly programmatic. There's not a lot of AI built into that ordering of tasks, but we're building out several different ways of having self-learning algorithms in that task list that then can measure results of each one and reorder based on effectiveness, not just how it's been set up. So that problem is more analogous to what you two are talking about, and the real-time aspect of it is the hardest thing about it. It's like, how do you serve that and change those recommendations in real time, and then scaling that across tens of thousands of end users is a whole other problem set. Maybe some of you can help us do it, so if you'd like to come work at Yesware.
Yeah, from our perspective, so one of the ways we get users to actually use our tool is we try to fit it into their workflow as much as possible so they don't have to change a lot. And I guess one of the ways we entice them is we're just automating a lot of the rote processes that are very frustrating to them. So if an analyst is researching something and looking for some answer, they have to sift through hundreds and whoever knows how many documents they spend all day collecting information, and only then, I heard from one of our users, one of our customer sites, they were saying that the analysts spend like 80% of their time just collecting the information and then 20% analyzing. So we try to flip that and do all of those very frustrating, kind of tedious tasks for them and let them do what they're good at, what they like, which is the analysis. So we're trying not to change their workflow too much. We're trying to fit into everything they do and just learn from what they're doing. Since we can connect to all their tools, we learn from every little interaction they take. If they copy some text from their browser into their notes, we take that as a signal that was helpful. And so we try to learn from little things like that they're already doing. But we don't really want to change their workflow too much, besides just making some of those very tedious and time-consuming tasks a little easier for them.
Yeah, I think for us, the job is changing for our customers. So if you think about customer service 10 years ago, you were picking up a phone call to do most of your interactions. And now with chatbots and self-service apps and websites, a lot of the sort of transactional interactions are moving away from the call center. So it used to be that our users, they would take 50 calls a day, maybe 40 of them were transactional, they were very straightforward, and 10 of them were the really difficult, worked up emotional customers. And that ratio has completely shifted. So they're now in a situation where what used to be the worst call of the day is now every call of the day, which you can you've been on the other end of the line as that I can't believe I have to call X company who I don't like. But imagine being the person who receives that call from 300 million Americans who are calling in with the same angry problem. So this is really the role of AI to augment their abilities, is because their job is getting a lot harder. And the companies are needing to hire more and more employees, because even though the number of interactions are moving to chat and to self-service, the actual number of phone calls is going up. Because when it comes to issues of your health or money or insurance, all of us want to talk to a human at the end of the day. So approaches that are enabling those employees to have better conversations for their customers are actually better for the employee as well. So we found that not only are customers happier when calls go better, but the quality of life, the retention, the stress levels in the employees improves as well.
So there's kind of two aspects to AI enhancing the workforce. It sounds like one is to make people faster, like take up the time that they were spending on these manual tasks. And the other is to just make them better, right? Make humans less biased, a better form of function that kind of creates a quality. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, what we do, I'm just trying to think about how I can answer the question with something that I've not already said, so that it's helpful for folks. I mean, I think what we do is enhance their decision making, and interestingly enough, most people in big corporations don't enjoy all of the human capital tasks they actually have to do. They like working with people, but making a decision about who you're going to hire or how much you're going to pay them or writing performance reviews. I mean, that while they see it as a valuable task, it's not something that people typically say, well, I'd really like to go write 10 performance reviews today, or whatever. And then the same with the potential ratings in big companies tend to be sort of fraught with a lot of subjectivity. So it's not our value proposition, but it does make their lives a little bit easier because some of the pain in terms of making human capital decisions is really taken out of that process for them. And I think the other thing that we see, and I'm not, is that there are many companies, Salesforce included, who are committed to gender equity, right? So there's 3,800 companies that have actually made a public pledge, and there's a number of pledges committing to gender equity. And what they find is that it's really hard to operationalize that pledge. So how do you operationalize a commitment to reaching gender equity across tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees? And so being able to use a system not to replace that pledge, but to actually operationalize that pledge really enables them to see. I mean, if you think about it, one of the pledges is CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. It's actually, and Salesforce signed that one. It's Mark Benioff actually signed it. I mean, that's the goal of that pledge is that the CEO's name is actually on the pledge. So with that, now your name is actually on it, and it's on something that's public. How do I now make sure that I'm actually living up to that?
Can I just add something
Sure,
to that?
sure.
Because the Salesforce announced maybe 6 months ago that they had done this evaluation, signed the commitment, done the evaluation, and fixed it by basically adjusting women's salaries up, and it cost them something like $8 million.
Over the course, well, it's actually, they've done it 3 times.
Okay.
So, and the pledge is different than what Salesforce did around equal pay.
Okay.
So, and Salesforce, to my knowledge, sorry, this is not AI, but it's an interesting story, so it'll only take me a second. Salesforce, to my knowledge, is the only large company that has actually handled it this way, which is that they said, we have a pay gap.
Yeah.
And we're going to fix it. Most companies say we fixed our pay gap, right? So to my
60 minutes. It was not 60 minutes.
yeah, right. So yeah, it was. Yes, it was right before right before we launched the. Yeah, no. It was actually right before we launched the app on the App Exchange. It is men and women, but hold on, let me just tell the story. I know the whole story. That's why we're partners with Salesforce. So what they did was they said, we have a gap and we're going to fix it, right? And then they went and fixed it. It was $3 million the first time. Okay. And then they went and they said, well, we now did the analysis again and we have another pay gap. It was $3 million. And then then the last time they did it was 2.7. It was, to my knowledge, it was 3 times. And what they found is that the pay gap is elusive. It is an ever-moving target, right? So, and not that you can embark, which is what most large companies do, on a 6 to 8 month analysis of your pay, which is just one component of gender inequity. Pay is like table stakes. It's paying people equally for the job they're doing right now. It has nothing to do, quite frankly, with moving people up the chain and changing the composition of Fortune 500 CEOs. It has nothing to do with that. All it has to do is paying you equally for the job you're doing today. And what they found, and this is what Mark Benioff talked about on 60 Minutes, is that it is an ever-moving target because you can close it, and then the very next day you make a decision, and you could have a pay gap. So how do you close that? And I mean, that's part of what our software solves. We fix it once, and we fix it with every single decision, and you can see it. So that when we talk about AI as like the robots are going to take over or whatever, it actually anything that can be used for that can also be used for good. And so looking at it through that lens and the tremendous opportunity that we have to solve issues that have plagued us forever, we can do that with advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence. It is possible to, for instance, reach gender equity in our lifetime using advanced technologies. That is possible.
And I have one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. To go along the point of like it's a moving target, I know I've worked on some parts of the product where we tried to build AI. It's hard to build AI.
Totally.
Is it, and maybe the answer is yes, and it's obvious, but like, is it harder to manage people than it is to build the AI?
Probably depends on who you are and what function you're in. I think it.
Well, there are some things that people can't manage, right? Or people are not very good at managing, like real-time coaching of 10,000 call center employees is very, very hard to do in a scalable way. Or helping salespeople make moment-to-moment decisions on what to do next is very hard to do. And that's the promise of AI. And again, going back to the sort of augmented point, is like humans are very, very good at some aspects of human management, and they're very bad at some aspects of human management, like allocating compensation without acknowledging bias. And computers are better and better and better, and increasingly better at a faster rate at doing a lot of these computationally intensive, replicable, real-time interactions or augmentation. So the hope, again, is that these two can come together.
Any final thoughts? We'll open it up for questions. Who's got questions? Got to be some. Yeah. We got a microphone for you.
So your interaction between your AI and your user, how much have you tried to personalize that, and how much have you kept it as explicitly AI?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. Who wants to take that one?
I can try. So I guess for us, it's kind of funny when we are selling our software. AI is like such a hot topic these days, and so it gets a lot of attention, and a lot of people at companies are told like we need to be doing more AI, whatever that means, and so when we tell them what we do, they hear AI and they're very excited. So I guess when we're selling it, that's the AI aspect is very helpful. When we're actually talking to users, they think that's cool, but they really just want something that works. I think we've tried a couple different things. Like we tried having almost like giving a persona to our AI and like having a little picture even at the bottom. And so we tried that, but we found that I think people are excited about AI, and the users are excited that it augments them. We kind of try to personify it a little bit. We say it's like a teammate, but beyond that, we got rid of the picture and everything. I don't know if that answers your question. No, not Clippy.
Everyone's terrified of making Clippy. So we had a very similar kind of life cycle where we had the idea of having an actual personification of the AI, and then we backed that up and had more of the persona of a coach as compared to something that you can physically interact with or see as being the embodiment of the AI. So the AI is purposely not embodied.
Take another question? Yeah.
If it's not a trade secret, what machine learning technologies do you guys use to implement your platform?
Trying to think what I can say.
Not a technical group.
So I can, at a very high level, so we are in Amazon. Our real-time engine is all proprietary C code because it has to be millisecond speed. That is not the machine learning platform. The machine learning platform is a TensorFlow deep learning approach, but offline from production real time. Doing deep learning in milliseconds we're not there yet.
Other questions? Yeah. Wait, microphone. Yeah.
So around AI, my question is, there's an element of just common sense, right? And leaders to get better at understanding diversity, inequality and pay gaps and so forth. So how do you use AI along with what's really needed, in my belief, and especially tech, management and leadership theory of like just understanding inequality and so forth and becoming better?
So who we sell to are companies, well, we could probably sell to anyone, to be honest with you. We actually sell to companies who've made a public pledge committing to gender equity. So there's a number of them. Paradigm for Parity is one, CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. the former administration's Equal Pay Pledge and Tech Inclusion Pledge. Those are two additional examples. And so they have some level of commitment to gender equity. Even if it's only initially as a PR, they are at least willing to put their company's name and brand on a pledge. But I'm not done. I'm not done. It's the interruption thing,
There we
right?
go.
And so they have that, and so what they struggle with is there may be commitments in pockets, right? There may be what you're talking about. There may be understanding at the top, or there may be understanding at the chief diversity officer, or the chief people officer. It tends to happen if you were to you could create a heat map around that of the level of commitment. If I'm a chief diversity officer at like a Salesforce, which has 30,000 employees, or at a Cisco, which has 70,000 employees, how do I actually make sure that those decisions and that change is happening across the organization? It's virtually impossible. Because I could send people to, and I don't have an affront with but I could send people to implicit bias training, but then what? Then how do I actually change the decisions that they're making, right? And so that's ultimately what we do. This is why it's enhanced us. It's not a replacement of us, right? It is changing the way that you do your work, so it's enhancing the way you do your work. And then, yes, absolutely, the cultural change needs to happen. Now, whether or not that happens before or after is still an open question, right? Because as you look at the data, and this is one of the things that we see, while the people analytics person is so critical to us, and them shaking their head yes is super important, it's almost as if you have somebody you're implanting a new organ in a body, right? And we want to make sure that organ doesn't get rejected, right? The new heart or kidney or liver does not get rejected, and it's actually their data. It's not our data, it's their data. So it begins to change the mind of what we actually see, and that begins to change the culture. Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah. Microphone, hang on. Yeah.
Do any of you have experience with customers who complain that the AI isn't learning fast enough? And how do you address that?
I mean, we've had lots of concerns from customers saying, like, the AI, it's great you returned this data to us, but it doesn't fully explain the situation. Like, at the same time that we were doing this study and gathering this data that you then analyzed for best practices or for recommendations, we also did X and Y and Z. And so by the time you get the data back to us, we need to account for these other exogenous variables that you didn't fold into the AI. So it's got that lag aspect to it. And what do we do about it? Like, we're sort of cutting away at options for how to apply this technology to find specific use cases where it actually can fit the customer need. Because sadly, it doesn't yet fit like the dream of what we want it to be.
Do you think the bar for an AI suggesting a decision is higher than if just another person suggests it? Yeah,
Yes.
I definitely
see a lot of
think
yeses.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it's has to be 2x better at explaining, 10x? Like, what is there a rough?
I think you're looking for these magic moments. Like, you talked about the nodding of the head. You talked about the analyst being like, "Oh, I never would have found that." Like, you're looking for or that's a great suggestion. Like, you're looking for these magical user moments that basically they wouldn't have expected to get, that their manager might not have given them, or that come at the right time. And delivering that in a simple way is like, that's the challenge.
Can I follow up with another question very selfishly? This is for Cogito, is that how you say it?
Sure.
Is the North Star for that company like every single person getting real-time feedback on how they're interacting with other people?
Yeah, so the approach that we use is sort of context agnostic. So we can improve all different types of conversations. We actually started in healthcare and trying to understand distress and depression from the voice. And now we measure sales outcomes, we measure customer service outcomes, we measure insurance claims. And what's sort of interesting from a technical perspective is one of the big limitations historically has been what's called channel separation, which is basically that it's really hard for machine to understand if I'm talking or if you're talking, and that's why we started in telephones, because channel separation comes naturally on the telephone. You know which channel one person is versus the other. That problem has effectively been solved in the last 2 years due to new machine learning approaches. So it unlocks the ability for us to put our software on your smartwatch. And if I start interrupting you, I'll get a buzz. Or if I'm monologuing, I'll get a buzz. So I'll know what's happening. So the approach absolutely is sort of agnostic to the problem space when it comes to human communication.
Cool. Time for some more questions? Yeah. Oh. Hold it.
I'm loud enough, so. But still, so my question is, as you might have seen the trends over the last 4, 5, 10 years maybe, it started with big data being the real big buzz, and then it evolved into artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then came blockchain. So where do you see, or how do you see AI evolving in the next couple of years? I wouldn't even say 5 or 10 years. I'm just going to say 1 or 2 years.
So typically, what we see in most new technologies is that you experience it, and I think in probably what is a lower risk environment, so from a B2C perspective, and then it's actually adopted from a B2B perspective, right? So we had Siri, now we have Alexa, and there's a number of those kinds of B2C technologies that are AI enabled, right? Some of them we don't even know. And so as that continues to get adopted, so for instance, as there's more Alexas in houses and more smart homes, then there's more trust of that, and then it actually begins to infiltrate the B2B environment. And so I think that we probably are, at least really at the beginning of the adoption of how do we actually trust the AI and implement it. I feel like it is probably at the hockey stick. I mean, part of it was just getting everybody's data in the cloud, right? I mean, if you want to use something like advanced technology, like AI, or you actually need to be able to access the data. So first, it was actually getting them to move off of on-premise systems, and now you're in the cloud. Now we can access, for us, that's critically important because that's how we access companies' data. Now you can layer things on top of that, and then the adoption of, okay, I use these different technologies already, right? So voice-enabled, I have a 7-year-old daughter. She doesn't have a phone, but she has a watch phone, and she can call me, which is voice-enabled, wherever she is, and so that's an example of AI that I've adopted in my house, right? And so as we become more trustworthy of those, then we'll actually see it in businesses.
Other thoughts on that one? No? You got a question.
I'm just seeing how it gets developed in a silo to address particular business problems, but I'm already seeing umbrellas over sections where you're looking at, gender equity and analyzing that and resolving one issue, and then but you automatically start veering off, but then you start getting little nudges when you're interacting that you're diverging from the plan. And I would love to have your technology because my boss and I have a very similar approach when it comes to time to write our reviews. I hate doing my self-review, and I'd love something to go through my project notes and come up with a nice document I can send up the chain, and then he can add his language. He flips through his book and looks at nice phrases he can pat me on the back with and float it further up the chain when neither of us want to deal with the process at all. So I see the consolidation of the siloed approaches and saying, hey, there's this other approach over here that's worked really well. Aha, I can now use that to augment what I'm doing on my side. Comments?
I mean, yeah, I would agree, right? So I think if we had your technology with an app on we could combine those, right? Yeah, exactly. Where or you can monitor how much someone is actually speaking in a meeting, or whose ideas are taken, or those kinds of things. I think that's interesting. We rewrite performance reviews, but that's certainly another place where, depending on, I don't know your technology as well, but if you were sourcing that information, that I think that honestly is really kind of the idea behind the different clouds of Salesforce, which is understanding how you bolt on all these different technologies onto a sort of vast data set to actually make them more useful. So whether you're looking at Sales Cloud or Service Cloud, or you're looking at verticals like retail or healthcare.
Take a question from you back there.
My name is Alexander. I'm implemented CRM solutions from 2002. And what I found that even implemented CRM in a big companies, as a sales people are starting to adapt to CRM like cockroaches. They know what to do to have good scores. And they don't doing what they're supposed to do to be more effective. And I have a question: how you protect your system from sales managers to be adapted and minimize that effect?
So the question is, like, how do you avoid a system being gamed? Yep.
So I can answer this from our approach, which is, I was talking earlier about trust and how we don't sort of expose the whole black box. So we have an intervention system which is very behaviorally driven. So it's very actionable items that you can change in real time. And then we have a scoring system which is much more of a 1,000 input type of traditional kind of machine learning web that is doing the call scoring. And you can provide very actionable guidance, but have a very obfuscated scoring system that kind of protects you from individuals trying to game it, because there are just so many inputs. And the other nice part about voice is that there are aspects of your voice that are very easy to control, like speaking rate or how loud you're talking. But other aspects like pitch and energy are actually far more subconscious. And you can change them, but you can't always control how you change them. So that makes it harder to game the system as well.
So we're talking about the App Exchange. I'd love to hear, too, kind of how that's fit in with y'all's strategies as we think about AI moving fast, App Exchange moving fast. How are you kind of bringing these worlds together?
I can go for like the two who answer all the questions. They're all going to laugh because they were laughing earlier because I said we actually launched the first gender equity. That's not why you're laughing, but we launched the first gender equity app on the App Exchange, and it's free, so you can all download it. So and when we think about the App Exchange, for us. The reason that we wanted to be Salesforce partners and actually launch an app on the App Exchange was actually to move us faster toward gender equity. And that, I think probably for most of the folks sitting up here who are Salesforce partners, and this is true for us as well, it's about sales, right? You can basically, if you are a new technology, and if you look at it through a sales lens, and I am now a Salesforce partner, I'm now an install base expansion rather than a net new sale. Because in order to get an app on the App Exchange, I assume that most people know this, you don't just load it. There's a whole process by which you have to go through the business lens, you have to go through the technology lens, and then you actually get approval, and then you can launch your app on the App Exchange. For us, certainly it was about sales, but for us that was a means to an end, because from a social perspective, achieving gender equity in sales actually massively accelerates our time toward gender equity, because most CEOs have sales experience. 90% of new CEOs in 2015 had sales experience, and 100% of them were men. So if we can actually change the trajectory of who you promote from the very first line in your sales organization all the way up, we can actually massively change who actually not only is in the C-suite, but who has the most power in the C-suite, which is the head of sales, is your COO, which is typically the person who's in line for your CEO, and your CEO. We can change that, and that's why we wanted to actually launch an app on the App Exchange, which is really just for us the beginning, because we could actually make that change. And by the way, we could also grow your sales organization, because gender diverse sales organizations massively outperform their non-gender diverse peers. So it's not only a question of fairness, it's actually a question of do you want to expand your sales? Do you want to expand the economic footprint of your company? And so that's why we did it, in addition to sort of the logical reasons.
That's really cool.
I think one last question.
Yeah, sure. Anyone new who didn't have a chance to, anyone who didn't ask a question.
I think you had a question before, no?
All right, great.
I guess from my experience working with AI, we started off in a responsive state, right? We had reports and analytics after the fact. We're now in a place where we can receive immediate feedback, kind of in the moment feedback, leveraging AI tools. I guess as kind of processing power increases and we can get more predictive AI tools embedded in B2B, I guess the B2B domain, how do you guys see your products evolving as we can kind of leverage the predictive power of AI moving forward?
It's a good last question.
I mean, my vision for what I want Yesware to do is basically take all the data, all the interaction data of you as a salesperson, and roll back your history of interacting with all your customers and prospects, and then take a point in time right now and project forward, given the deals that are in flight, and then discount those for the likelihood to close, and estimate the time they're going to close, and estimate the dollar value of what they're going to do. And therefore, you just have a narrative of your typical sales cycle, and then a point for each place where your current deals are, and therefore the discounted cash flow of your pipeline. And then roll that up to all the people reporting to a sales manager, and roll that up to a director, and roll that up to a VP, and basically take away all of this ridiculousness about trying to forecast what deals are going to close when by setting a flag. You know what I mean? That's how I think we could get there, actually, because I think there is enough data, but I think the data is too fragmented right now. But that's where we would like to go.
We do predictive now, so we can actually, within our platform, so in the United States, it's 168 years to gender equity. That's the current state. And so we can actually tell every company, we do predictive, what their time to gender parity is, and then what they could expect to get from an expanded economic footprint. And then based on the decisions that they make, their time to parity either is longer or it's shorter. But you're actually choosing to make it longer or shorter, which right now, you're not aware of what those decisions are. And I agree with you. I think over time they'll get more, as we continue to go along, they'll get more and more accurate.
Yeah, we're at a similar point. So, our customers today are using self-report metrics, customer surveys, telephone calls after the fact, which can be days or weeks out. And not only can we provide a measurement in real time, we can tell you, if you were to speak this way instead of that way, we'll move this metric that you care about by this amount. And we can tie that directly to individuals' changes in speaking behavior, so that even the agents and the employees who think they're doing really well, we can give them even sort of pointers on small things to change.
Any last thoughts? Close it out. Let's give them a round of applause. This is great. Appreciate it.